rockstar introduction. Thank you so much. Hello, Miami. It's so exciting to be here. I don't think I'm supposed to hide behind this screen. I'm going to come out in front of it. My name is Catherine D. Henry, and I am SVP of Media.Monks. And I'm responsible for Web3 and Metaverse. And today I'm going to talk to you about future brands and how Web3 and Metaverse are transforming the way we communicate with our audiences today, and especially what we need to do as the competition and the technology gets more complicated over the next year. So I want to talk about how we're going to build and monetize the Metaverse. Now, Media.Monks, we have some 9,000 people across 54 offices worldwide, and we help major enterprise and consumer brands figure out how to get there. And it's funny because when we talk about it, as of last October, we got this question a lot. Isn't this dead? And my answer is always about this, to think about the automobile industry. Now, in 1928, if Henry Ford had decided to change his automobile company to AutoCo, would it be fair to change the way that we communicate with, sorry, the noise outside. Would it be fair to measure him against that company, the performance of that company across an entire industry? Would we then say, oh, automobiles must not be doing very well because AutoCo is suffering? But that wouldn't be fair because it's much bigger than the automobile company is much bigger than Ford. It's the OEMs, it's distribution, it's point of sale. And so that's the same way we need to think about the metaverse today. It's $45 billion industry, and it's global. As Winston Churchill once famously said, this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And so I really want to focus today on how culture and community are driving the monetary strategy in the metaverse and Web3. Now, unfortunately, this thing is not going to show a lot of my videos, but these are some of the works that we've done with Logitech and Adidas and others, and this is effectively where we are. During the pandemic, we were suddenly catapulted into this new space. It was a 3D internet, and it felt like a very different medium. And so I want to talk about how culture and community are driving us into this next space, but specifically how to monetize that. And so to give a little bit of context, many of you will be familiar, no doubt, with Rogers' diffusion of innovations theory developed in 1962 that posited that the first movers, the early adopters and innovators were the first ones to go online. But even if we look at the development of the hardware, we see that home computers entered the market as early as 1977, and the Apple Mac took off in 1984. As late as 1996, Armstrong and Hable posited how difficult it was for companies to really capture the internet's community building capabilities. It took a while. And yet, by 1997, AOL users were spending 1 million hours chatting online every day. And by 2003, creators were, for the first time, able to share images, create profiles, and to share videos on internet. It's the first time it introduced an entire generation to these new creative tools, which then revolutionized life online. And it planted the seeds for what we're seeing today from the cultural perspective, where we're seeing major artists like Soulja Boy in 2007 who dropped massive hits, and the internet became a cultural medium. So we're in a really exciting inflection point in which young people, creators, are driving this movement, allowing them to become media creators, innovators across platforms like MySpace, Facebook, and YouTube. For the first time, this generation was able to express themselves in this medium, to interact, learn, and share. Communities formed. Cultures evolved. And even as early as 1968, Licklider and Taylor said that communities would be happier online because for the first time they weren't limited to or linked by propinquity, in other words, their closeness to one another, but by common interests and goals. And so if we're going to roughly categorize those go into 4 different spaces. One is interests, social, transactional, and fantasy behaviors. And I break that down even further into, and so how does that transport into Web3? So in Web3 environment, it's basically this. This is where it evolves. And when we think about it, it's also going to be very much dictated by how the different generations. So you look at, as the generations progress, especially Gen Z, they're going to be a lot more driven by by brands, by causes, by those values, by the common interests. And many of these will intersect. So it's connectedness, it's a feeling of belonging, mission, meaning. And so when we look at brands and their positioning for, say, the next 2 years, especially on the horizon of potentially a global recession, we want to focus on Gen Z, which will represent some 30% of the global wealth by 2030, because they're the ones who are going to be driving this. And so much will also be driven by tokenomics. And I want to say that in the conversations that I've had with brands over the past few months, we're really talking about a value. But one thing that struck me is how much people are really afraid of this N-word, NFTs. And it's fair to say that you can move away from the N-word, if you will, by talking about tokenomics, because that's really what's going to be driving it. But we don't necessarily have to use blockchain to create an engaging and powerful CSR system. In fact, there are other ways of doing it. By enabling communities to discover culture online, to engage meaningfully with one another, to deliver as brands relevant content that people will want to engage with and come back to, but also that they want to share, and to provide a meaningful connection, those values, those core values. And so the internal goals that I recommend that people start looking at really carefully is how to train and market your teams internally for 2023 and beyond. Because you really need to understand how to differentiate yourself specifically in this space, but also how to embrace this culture where it's a relationship in which you are giving and taking back from the community, not just data, but you also have to create a constant incentive system that is in many ways, if you think about the air mile industry or others, it's really about giving back and rewarding your customers on a consistent basis. And it doesn't necessarily have to be blockchain or images, it can be also real world value. So think of this token as a vehicle for value that carries through across multiple different platforms. And so we need to also think about engaging communities where they are and giving them something relevant. So again, as we look to 2023 and beyond for the next 2 years, we want to think about the platforms where they live and what they do, not necessarily just do a metaverse experience on Roblox. And finally, we want to make sure that when we give those value with tokens, that it's accessible. Not everyone's going to have a wallet, and I talked to a lot of people over the past week who are helping revolutionize this and make it so much easier to engage with clients, but also in a post-cookie world, be able to deliver value with these tokens that they can redeem in the real world, especially for real world experience, because we know that some 80% of Gen Z would rather spend money on experiences rather than products. So I have developed an entire series on Web3 and tokenomics and the future of specific industries, and I wanted to, it's a series of intelligence reports that are available online. So please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter if you'd like to read those in depth and all the research that I put into this. And thank you very much for your time.